This episode of Gators Breakdown is brought to you by MyBookie. MyBookie will match your first deposit by 50% all the way up to $1,000. Head to mybookie.ag and use promo code Gators to activate the offer. Bet, win, get paid at MyBookie.
Gators Breakdown, the Gators fan podcast, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I am your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. And joining me on this episode is Gabe DeArmond from Power Mizzou, part of the Rivals.com network, to give us an in-depth look at the Missouri Tigers ahead of Saturday's game as the Gators travel to Columbia, Missouri to take on the Tigers. Remember, you can find Gators Breakdown on news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. There you'll find all the Gators Breakdown episodes. Also listen and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. When using those services, please share, rate, and review the show. And on social media, follow Gators Breakdown on Twitter and Facebook at Gators Breakdown. And don't forget, every week, a News4Jax exclusive Talking with Troop. Former Gators tight end Ben Troop joins me once a week this season on News4Jax and gives his thoughts like only he can. Ben brings it every time, and you can catch that every week exclusively on news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. Gabe DeArmond from PowerMizzou.com, part of the Rivals Network, joining us here on Gators Breakdown. Gabe, let's start this. Let's start wide open to get this thing going. And Missouri's been two completely different teams this season: great at home and struggling on the road.
Yeah, and I have a hard time believing it's a home road thing. Although I understand why you would look at it and think that. I mean, you know, they're 5-0 at home, 0-4 on the road. That makes sense, but I don't know. The first game against Wyoming was a weird deal. That's a weird place to play. It's the season opener where strange things seem to happen. And then Missouri just had some weird bounces in that game. You know, they had a pick in the end zone. They had a fumble that Wyoming returned for a touchdown. They were going in for a touchdown right before half. Larry Rountree fumbled at the goal line. Wyoming picked it up, ran it back 85 yards. Kelly Bryant made the tackle on the last play of the half. Should have gone to halftime, but it was a horse collar tackle, and that gave Wyoming 3 free points. So that one was weird. But the one that just seemed to flip the season that I still can't figure out is losing at Vanderbilt. I mean, you guys saw Vanderbilt last week.
Yeah.
That's a bad football team. And I still don't have any explanation for how Missouri only managed to score 14 points in that game. And 7 of them came off an interception that gave them the ball at the 6-yard line. I mean, this offense through 6 games was averaging over 6 yards a play. They're now averaging 4.2 yards a play in the last 3. Every time they've snapped the ball, they're getting 2 fewer yards than they were for the first 6 games of the season. And who knows why? I mean, the simple explanation is they don't run very well, they don't throw very well, they don't catch very well, and they don't block very well. So it's very difficult to do anything well on offense when that's the case. But they weren't doing those things okay through 6 games, and now they aren't.
Of course, and one of the bigger headlines of the offseason was bringing in quarterback transfer from Clemson, Kelly Bryant. An up-and-down year so far, injured lately. How would you evaluate his performance, and if he can't go, what's the situation behind him?
Yeah, well, Barry Odom told us yesterday he expects him to play. Now, you and I both know college football coaches lie about injuries a lot. So that does not necessarily mean Kelly Bryant's going to play. But if he doesn't play, it means Barry just lied to us on Tuesday afternoon, which has happened before and is possible. I would evaluate Bryant's year as pretty similar overall to what I expected. I think less than fans expected. You know, I think a lot of people just see a quarterback who went to a college football playoff at Clemson and said, wow, that guy's coming to Missouri. This is amazing. Well, what you see is a guy who is he's I would say, a good college quarterback. He's solid. He's above average, but he's not great. He looked great at Clemson because Clemson has a whole bunch of great players around him. Missouri does not have as many great players. Now, the way Kelly's gotten there has been different. The first 6 games, he was better than I thought he would be. and the last two he's been worse than I thought he would be. The average comes out to what I thought, just maybe not the way I thought we'd arrive at it.
And what's the situation behind him coming up? I know, last week the backup Powell playing against Georgia. Is it him or the true freshman maybe getting more playing time this week?
Well, that's what's going to be interesting. Odom told us yesterday if for some reason Bryant couldn't go, he'd play both of them. But look, if it's up to me, I'm throwing true freshman Connor Bazelak out there because, and the only reason is they found out what Taylor Powell was last week, and he's a guy that can't win a game like this. I mean, he didn't get any help, but he wasn't ready for that. Bazelak came in. He only had one drive. He led Missouri down to like the 3-yard line. He looked pretty good doing it, and I think people have overreacted to that a little bit because Georgia still had quite a few starters in the game, but they're up 27-0 with 6 minutes left. You can't tell me that they're as into that drive as they were the previous drives. And then when Missouri got down to the 5-yard line and Georgia started caring about preserving the shutout, they did exactly that. But I would play Bazelak if Bryant can't go simply because he hasn't yet shown me that he can't win this game. I found out last week Taylor Powell can't win this game.
Gotcha. Now, shout out to one of your latest articles over at powermizzou.com. Gator fans, go check it out. For even more of an in-depth look at Florida's next opponent here. But Gabe, you asked the question of running back Larry Rountree. Is he having a down year, or is that just a perception?
I think it's a little bit of both. It's pretty interesting because my perception has been that he's having a down year, and he's the guy who I thought was Missouri's kind of stalwart on offense. Like, I knew what you were going to get from him. He was their best player. He was the guy they would lean on. And I've thought he's not having a very good year. And then I went back and looked at it, and his numbers are identical to what they were through 9 games last year. I mean, a little bit fewer yards per carry, but within 2 yards of what he had last year, within 1 touchdown of what he had last year through 9 games. And it was funny, when I talked to Missouri's coaches, they said the same thing. They said, you know what? I looked at his stats, and I was surprised that they were what they were last year because it doesn't feel like it. I don't know exactly why that is. Now, part of it is because in the last 4 games last year, Rountree averaged 27 carries for 130 some odd yards per game. He had 204 in the bowl game against Oklahoma State and ended up with 12-16 on the year. And so that obviously jumped the season numbers. And then what it also did is set an expectation that, hey, we're going to see that every week now. We're going to be talking about a guy that runs for 1,500, 1,600 yards. And that's obviously not going to be the case unless he just, I guess he could average 250 in the last 4 games, but I don't think that's real likely. What I'd like to see out of Missouri, and given the way this offense has played the last 3 weeks, I think this is really their only chance to beat Florida, and I don't think it's much of a chance. But it's what I thought they should have done the last 2 weeks and didn't, which is just line up and hand the ball to Larry Rountree 30 times, try to keep the clock running, try to limit the opponent's possessions, and try to win a game, 14-13. I mean, that's the only way this team's winning a game at this point, because they are not capable against a decent defense, and Florida's better than that, of putting 28, 35 points on the board. It's not going to happen unless the defense scores. So I would like to see them take the approach of just, hey, we're only going to give you 9 chances to score throughout the game. And we're going to hope that our defense is good enough that you don't do it on 7 of them.
No, and if we go back to last year's game versus Florida and just how potent that passing attack was versus Florida, of course led by Drew Lock, but Emmanuel Hall, Joshua Johnson, Alberto all had big days versus Florida. The wide receiver core, I'm sure it's been affected by quarterback play this year and lately, but are the recent struggles more than that?
Yeah, it's 2 things. I mean, obviously, you lost a guy who most people thought was going to go in the first round of the NFL draft, ended up slipping to the second round. And the one thing Drew Lock had was, I'd say, probably one of the 3 or 4 best arms in college football. I had somebody tell me last year that Missouri's deep passing game was different than almost anybody else's, because when most teams say our deep passing game, they're throwing balls 40 yards downfield. Missouri was throwing balls 60 yards downfield because they had the guy that could do it, and they had a receiver who could get out there. And so they were just stretching the field to a point that people couldn't cover it. And I ran the numbers earlier this week. Drew Lock threw 64 passes more than 20 yards in the air last year. He completed 30 of them for 1,100 and something yards, 14 touchdowns, and 1 pick. Kelly Bryant on the same types of passes this year is 10 for 27 for 300 and some odd yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. I mean, what it's doing is taking away the 50, 60-yard touchdowns. You know, I mean, you have to be really efficient on offense to just go on 10-play drives and score all the time. Missouri's not doing that, and they're not getting the explosive plays. But the other thing it's doing, when you play defense against Missouri, you don't have to worry that they're going to beat you deep, because of those 10 completions over 20 yards, 4 of them are to Albert O. You know, so they've only got, I think, 6 to wide receivers all season long. So they don't have wide receivers that are getting open. When they are getting open, either the quarterback's not getting them the ball, or when he does get them the ball, they're dropping it. You know, I mean, their best deep threat is probably Cam Scott. He's been targeted 25 times this year. He's caught 15. He's dropped 5 and fumbled 1. I mean, that's not a guy you can rely on. Their leading wide receiver this year would have been barely the number 3 leading receiver on last year's team. You know, their leading wide receiver has something like 360 yards on the season.
Gabe DeArmond from PowerMizzou.com, part of the Rivals Network, joining us here on Gators Breakdown. Last look here at the defensive side of the ball for Missouri. And Gabe, you know, it comes with the territory now. We expect Missouri to have, you know, always an impact player up front. And it's no different this season with defensive tackle Jordan Elliott.
Yeah, he has been really good. He is a guy who I think nationally now is starting to get some attention. He's a former, I think, 5-star kid who transferred from Texas, sat out 2 years ago, came on toward the end of last year, had 3 sacks in the regular season finale against Arkansas. So count that how you want. I know it happened against Arkansas, but I had people before the year telling me, we think this is his last year. We think he's going to be good enough to go pro. And I think he's playing himself into that. He is. And the amazing part is, Missouri's getting nothing from defensive end. I mean, they have guys out there. They kind of fill the space, but they don't make very many plays. Jordan Elliott up front is in the backfield all the time. He's wrecking plays, and he's had a heck of a season.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. You know, Florida's kind of, you know, figuring out some things in the interior of the offensive line. Nick Buchanan at center coming back, but, you know, Ethan White making his first start last week. If Brett Hagee can't go, he'll be making the second start this week. And then the other guard position, Richard Garage, another, you know, a redshirt freshman. So, you know, Jordan Elliott could be eating here when he lines up against his Florida offensive line.
And Missouri's going to need him too, him and Nick Bolton.
Yeah, linebacker, of course, superstar linebacker Kel Garrett went down early October. But fellow linebacker Nick Bolton's out there putting on a clinic trying to make up for the loss of Garrett.
Yeah, he should be. And I would think Florida fans will remember the name Kentrell Brothers, he was an all-SEC linebacker for Missouri, got drafted by the Minnesota Vikings. He's still in the league. Somebody told me prior to last year, which was before Nick Bolton had played a single game, if he is not as good as Kentrell Brothers was, then we failed. And he looks every bit that. He's leading the SEC in tackles. I mean, there are games where I wonder if anybody else has made a tackle for Missouri, because he just seems to be the guy that makes every tackle. You know, he had a couple interceptions early in the year, and he and Garrett were, when they were together, I really believe, and I know this sounds weird to say at Missouri, but I think that was the best linebacking duo in the SEC maybe at the time. Garrett got hurt. Bolton's still been really good. I don't know if he'll be first team all SEC because he wasn't a big name coming into the year. Missouri's probably going to end up, you know, 6-6, 7-5, and guys on teams like that don't tend to get those honors. But Nick Bolton has been as good as really any linebacker I've seen in this league this year.
Absolutely. And to wrap it up, lastly, you know, this pass defense for Missouri is highly ranked this season. It's going to be strength on strength when Trask and Florida's wide receiver core matches up against this Missouri secondary.
Yeah, it's interesting. The pass defense last year was 115th in the country. Like, there were often times in games where I was tweeting or posting on our message board, I don't understand why you'd ever run the ball against this team. Like, I would just line up and throw it every down because you're always going to eventually get there. It's now, last I checked, it's fourth in the country. And the safeties have been much better this year. That's a big improvement. But fourth in the country still surprises me. Might have something to do with the fact that, they played Kentucky, who doesn't throw the ball. They played Vanderbilt, who can't really throw the ball very well. So that helps. But they have had a good defense, and I'll be interested to see how they do against Kyle Trask, because in watching him, I mean, he's not Lynn Bowden at quarterback, but he really does a nice job moving around and keeping plays alive with his legs. I mean, he's a good passer. I don't mean to say he's not, but what impresses me the most about him is he moves enough to keep plays going. And Missouri has struggled with guys who can move around a little bit. So I'll be interested to see how they do this week.
All right, Gabe, man, thank you once again. Second year in a row you've come here on Gators Breakdown to preview Missouri. And, man, I can't thank you enough for the in-depth look at these Tigers.
No problem, David. I do not expect this one to go quite like the last one.
Oh, yeah, but much well, it was a little chilly last year in Gainesville, but it'll be chilly for these Gators heading to Columbia this weekend.
It's actually supposed to warm up. It's supposed to be close to 50 by this weekend. We got snow on the ground right now, but that should be gone.
Yeah, that's cold for Gators, but so, but in the end, definitely won't be an excuse for the game or performance there. But Gabe, man, thank you once again.
All right, no problem. Have a good one.
Are you the type of fan that knows football so well that you could choose any game and call it? Well, MyBookie is the place for you, because they let you turn all your sports knowledge into cash in your wallet. Between football season, NBA, and college basketball season, it's time to get off the sideline and get in on the action with MyBookie. If you're the kind who likes to bet a little and win a lot, then try a parlay. Pick your locks for the week, put them together in one parlay bet, and when they all come through, the rewards will be huge. Tired of watching the game from the couch with nothing to gain? Then right now head to MyBookie and they will match your deposit by 50% all the way up to $1,000. Use promo code GATORS to activate the offer. Visit MyBookie online today at mybookie.ag. That's MYBOOKIE.ag. And don't forget to use promo code GATORS when creating your account to claim the bonus. Bet, win, get paid at MyBookie. All right, and here we go. Missouri returns home after 35 days between games played at Memorial Stadium. Missouri last played at home on October 12th in its homecoming win over Ole Miss in a win, 38-27. At the time, it was Missouri's fifth consecutive win. Missouri moved into the top 25 the following week at number 22, and then lost its next three contests all on the road. And with the bye week during that three-road stretch, Missouri's 35 days between home games is kind of a scheduling anomaly here. In fact, Missouri is the only Power 5 team to go that long between home games this season, and is tied with Ball State, Northern Illinois, and Kent State for the longest streak nationally this season. So it's been a while. They'll be excited to get back in front of their home crowd. And they're a different team at home. You heard Gabe and I talking about it here, and their home games have consisted of a 38-7 win over West Virginia, 50-0 over Southeast Missouri, 34-14 against South Carolina, 42-10 win over Troy, and a 38-27 win over Ole Miss. So they won those 5 straight home games after opening the season at Wyoming in a 37-31 loss here. So Missouri, they'll be happy to be back home on Saturday. They're 5-0 at home so far this season. They've been dominant at home this season, averaging 40.4 points per game compared to 28.2 overall, and allowing just 11.6 points compared to 19.1 overall. So they are a different team. 3 Power 5 wins and a pair of SEC victories over South Carolina and Ole Miss at home. So they're averaging 216 yards per game on the ground at home this season, limiting opponents to 70.2 rushing yards per game. It's kind of it's good for a plus 146.4 advantage on the ground in its 5 home game wins. And opponents are averaging just 2.1 yards per rush in 5 games played at the Zoo this season. So Florida's struggling running the ball. Probably not going to figure it out against Missouri when they've only been giving up 2.1 yard per rush at home. But, it's important if you buy into the fact that they're a different team at home or away, or just playing tougher opponents just in general. In recent weeks. So also averaging 245.5 passing yards per game at home, while limiting its opponents to just 167.2. And the Tigers own a +6 turnover margin at home and have scored 5 defensive touchdowns at home this season. Missouri has won its last 7 home games combined dating back to last season. That's the program's 8th longest winning streak in Memorial Stadium there. So, Missouri, we'll see. We'll see if that trend kind of continues Saturday, how well they play, or if it's just kind of a recent trend and just kind of a coincidence here. But, hey, look, not only are they a different team at home so far this season, but traditionally as well under head coach Barry Odom in the month of November. The Tigers are 10-3 in the final month of the season since Odom took over there for Missouri, with 2 of the 3 losses coming on the road at ranked teams. They had a streak of 9 consecutive November wins snapped last Saturday when they lost to Georgia. Included in Missouri's 10 November wins under Coach Odom, 2 against Florida, 45-16 victory in 2016, and a 38-17 win over the 13th-ranked Gators a year ago. As part of their, and pair that with their SEC move in 2012, Missouri's won 4 of 7 meetings against the Gators, including blowout fashion in those last 2. So take a look at the game a little bit here, and when Florida's on offense, and Missouri's kind of been well on defense. Kind of you expect Missouri to be good on defense. They just kind of, with Barry Odom, kind of just that consistency on defense. They've been dominant on that side of the ball, especially since the season opener at Wyoming. Disappointing there, but numbers support that. So for right now, schedule maybe not the strongest, as Gabe mentioned. Some of the teams really can't pass. Kentucky, Vanderbilt recently, especially with all the injuries. But they where they rank nationally in several categories is pretty high. Yards per pass, ranked 3rd nationally with 5.5. Pass defense overall, they're ranked number 4, only giving up 147.7 yards a game. Yards per play, they're ranked 10th. Total defense, they're 10th. Scoring defense, they're 18th. And keep it going here. Their opponents have reached the red zone just 21 times this year. That's 10th fewest nationally and the 2nd fewest allowed by any SEC team, trailing only Georgia. So maybe Florida has to hit some big plays here once they get in the red zone. You could see some struggles here. Florida maybe not be getting to the red zone. Maybe have to hit some big plays because Missouri doesn't let teams necessarily get to the red zone here. So Florida may have to hit some big plays as we saw last week here. So heading into the game, they, as I mentioned, 4th nationally, tops in the SEC in passing yards allowed per game. And it's a stark contrast from last year because you heard Gabe mention it, and most teams could do whatever they wanted to against Missouri last year in passing. And they were 112th nationally, allowing opponents last year to throw for 262 a game. And right now they've improved 108 spots from last year. So kind of looking at last year's game and maybe what to expect. Maybe it'll be a little different. Florida's offense is different, better passing the ball. But Missouri's defense as well, better defending passing the ball here. So, and look, go back to last week. Missouri limited Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm to his worst career completion percentage ever, 44.8, and that was the week after he lit up Florida. So, they still couldn't get anything going on offense, but that defense still played well last week versus Georgia. And look, here's a kind of crazy number here for Missouri. Their last 13 interceptions have all been converted to touchdowns, dating back to last year's game at Tennessee. Every interception has had, since then, been converted to a touchdown, whether strictly straight off the interception or the offense marching down right after the interception and scoring a touchdown. So, man, Florida's going to have to take care of the ball here. Florida's thrown 9 interceptions on the season. Trask throwing 6 of them. So Trask needs to take care of the ball and not let Missouri continue that streak of 13 interceptions going for scores here. Also with Missouri, 5 defensive touchdowns this season. That's the nation's 2nd best mark. So, and all 5 of their defensive scores have come at home this season. So, Florida's going to have to take care of the ball. Just looking at those last 2 numbers there, all the interceptions ending up in touchdowns for Missouri, strictly off the interception or the offense scoring, and 5 defensive touchdowns so far for Missouri this year on the defensive side of the ball. So, take care of the ball on the road, Gators. Take care of the ball. But, you heard Gabe mention it as well. The pass rush just isn't there for Missouri from the defensive end position. I don't know if they'll be able to put consistent pressure on Kyle Trask. Overall, their defense has been good. Pass defense, it does work there, but I think Kyle Trask will be given enough time. Passing game will be effective enough, and some players on the defensive side of the ball for Missouri to look out for. As we mentioned, Kel Garrett went down with a pectoral injury against Troy back in October. But, Nick Bolton is putting together a season, a crazy season right here. Since Garrett's injury, one of the most productive SEC linebackers here, 46 tackles over the last 4 games while adding 5.5 tackles for loss with a sack. Now leads the SEC in tackles per game with 9.1 and solo tackles per game at 6.1 and leads the team with 82 total tackles. He's averaging an incredible 11 tackles per game in 5 SEC games and has an incredible 37 solo tackles in 5 SEC games as well. And he's a monster out there. Florida's going to have to account for him right now. Another player we mentioned earlier too, defensive tackle Jordan Elliott. Had a back at Vanderbilt game, career high of 5 tackles back then, where he was virtually unblockable. Followed that with a 6-tackle game against Kentucky, including 5 solo stops there. And then last weekend at Georgia added 4 tackles and now has 15 tackles over the last 3 games from his defensive tackle spot. And one more player I think we need to highlight here, safety Tyree Gillespie. Gillespie is Missouri's top-graded defender this season, according to Pro Football Focus, checking in with a grade of 92. Sensational over the last 2 games, posting 11 tackles in 3 halves. He missed the opening quarter versus Kentucky due to a targeting penalty at Vanderbilt with 3 tackles for loss, 2 pass breakups, and a forced fumble there in the last 2 games. So some defenders there, still Missouri has some playmakers on the defensive side of the ball there, and there's just a few on each level there that the Gators will have to look out for. And going back to the home and away thing, look, there's no secret. Missouri's offense is just more explosive at home, has been more explosive at home. As we said, competition's ramped up as the season went on too, so maybe not so much to do with home and away, but still worth keeping an eye on here. They're averaging 40.4 points per game in 5 games at home, where they're averaging just 13 games on the road. Offense right now is a mess. Kelly Bryant hasn't been healthy, out last week versus Georgia. And we'll see if he plays versus Florida here, and if he does, how healthy he is. And ever since their 38-27 win over Ole Miss in their last home game, the Tigers have just managed 21 points over the last 3 games, getting stuffed by Vanderbilt and Kentucky teams that aren't really great to be doing that to an SEC opponent. And the running game has been a problem here for Missouri so far this year. Missouri's 5-0 when running for 165 yards or more, 0-4 when being held to fewer than 165. So 165 is the number there to look out for if this year, so far is a trend or not. Look for 165 yards and see if they get that on the ground and see what happens in the outcome. With that change with them being at home, they've played some pretty good defensives in Kentucky and Georgia lately, so that probably contributes more so than playing on the road. But Florida's defensive front, pretty much, LSU and South Carolina back-to-back weeks ran on Florida, but those are the only 2 times Florida's allowed more than 140 yards on the ground. Florida's bounced back nice since shutting down, of course, DeAndre Swift, Keyshawn Vaughn the last couple weeks. You got to look for Larry Rountree here. Missouri's running back at 14 carries for 72 yards last year versus Florida. But the run game's not humming anywhere near that right now for the Tigers, and the Gators are playing well the last couple weeks and stopping the run. Spoke about Kelly Bryant earlier, and he's been pretty inconsistent at quarterback. His best performances have come against Wyoming, where he went 31 of 48 for 423 yards and 2 touchdowns in their season opening loss, and then another performance against Ole Miss, where he went 23 of 35 for 329 yards and 1 touchdown. His last 2 games have not been great. Been dealing with a hamstring injury. Missed last week at Georgia, of course, but in his last 2 games before the Georgia game, 13 of 26 for 140 yards and 1 touchdown, 1 interception. And then versus Kentucky, finished 10 of 19 for 130 yards and a touchdown. He's been dealing with a hamstring. Probably helps Florida a good bit because there have been a couple of times this season where Bryant has made plays with his legs. Against South Carolina, 17 carries for 77 yards, and Vanderbilt carries the ball 16 times for 72 yards. So with him nursing that hamstring, I don't see any of that happening. I can see this Florida pass rush taking full advantage as well. If Bryant can't go, we'll see where they turn. If they turn to Taylor Powell, who only has the other starting experience this year, made his first start last week versus Georgia, where he went 10 of 22, 84 yards and an interception. So we'll see. We'll see, because whoever's that quarterback for the Tigers, tied in, and I'm going to try and pronounce it just for fun here, Albert Okwuegbunam, or Alberto, as everyone calls him for ease. So he'll be the player Florida will have to try and have a solution for. The best solution would have been Amari Burney to match up on him, but Burney was on crutches last Saturday, pretty doubtful to play against Missouri. So it'd be interesting to watch here, how Florida matches up on Alberto. Do they have to double team him a lot? Is that a combo of a linebacker and a safety, or a cornerback and a safety? That's worth looking out for here in Albert O, if maybe he can get going and spark this Missouri offense. So I think he's the player to really look out for and help these quarterbacks here at Missouri. So all that said, here we go. I'm predicting a 30-17 victory for Florida. 30-17, and that's if Kelly Bryant plays for Missouri. If not, I think you can kind of change the score to like a 37-10 type of game here. I believe these players have heard enough about the last couple games versus Missouri in 2017, a 45-16 Missouri win the week after Jim McElwain was fired, and then last season, of course, the 38-17 romp in the swamp Missouri put on the Gators. So the last couple of games haven't been close, and this team should be looking to rectify that. I really think Mizzou's pass defense is good, but they've featured on some pretty bad offenses up to this point. I know they did well versus Jake Fromm last week, but Florida has too many weapons here that have beat Missouri's man coverage, and the Florida wide receivers, I think, have another big day here. Defense will stop the run again, limit Albert O. And this game will be, I think, within striking distance for Missouri if Kelly Bryant plays, but Florida pulls away in the fourth quarter. All right, so let's take a look around. What else is going on in SEC and games of note here? Alabama, Mississippi State's another noon game there at Mississippi State. We'll see how Alabama bounces back from the LSU loss. Then at 3:30, all eyes will switch from Columbia, Missouri to Auburn, Alabama, and see how Georgia and Auburn match up. And Florida, for any chance to get to Atlanta, Georgia needs to lose this game versus Auburn. Auburn coming off of a bye week. Can they figure something out? Can Bo Nix play well against a good defense? He struggled against better defenses this year, so we'll see if Auburn has anything ready for Georgia. But that game's at 3:30. Gator fans will definitely want to keep an eye on that one. Also at 3:30 on the SEC Network, Kentucky and Vanderbilt. 7 o'clock, LSU and Ole Miss. And 7:30, I think another game worth keeping an eye on just to see how South Carolina bounces back here and how Texas A&M plays the week before they play Georgia. If Georgia does slip up versus Auburn, you'd like to see a good performance here from Texas A&M. Hopefully, we can have a little bit of confidence next week if Georgia does slip up versus Auburn when Texas A&M goes against Georgia, and hopefully gives Georgia 2 straight losses here, and Florida ends up in Atlanta somehow. So that's worth keeping an eye on as well. That 7:30 game on the SEC Network between South Carolina and Texas A&M. FSU is hosting Alabama State, and then Miami is off this week. So not really a headlining weekend, but Georgia Auburn being at 3:30 right after the Florida game. Hopefully we'll be celebrating a win, and we can sit there for another 3.5 hours and maybe cheering for an Auburn victory here. So helping the Gators maybe to a path to Atlanta. So thanks to Gabe DeArmond from Power Mizzou previewing the Missouri Tigers for us. Really, really good in-depth preview there. If you want some more, as I said, head to powermizzou.com. He's got plenty of articles there detailing this Missouri team. I'm the host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.